Okay, everybody, we are ready to switch gears into looking at the future of supply and innovation abroad. I hope you enjoyed the networking break. I hope you got a chance to have a root beer float and some good conversations. Before the break, we focused on the power of sustained programmatic demand. We're now turning to the other side of that equation, the future of supply. This conversation will explore what we can learn from international markets, from government acting as a demand aggregator to standardized prototypes and shared frameworks to procurement reform, open source construction details, and the cultural conditions that make industrialized delivery easier or harder to sustain. Moderating the conversation is Rommel Sulit, who's on our IHS planning committee, and he's joined by Menno Hilberts, Cooper Lane, and Dr. Daniel McCrum. The future of supply, innovation abroad. What can the U.S. learn from global leaders in industrialized construction? Please welcome them to the stage.
Test. Okay, great. We got a lot to go over, and I apologize for running a little late. But first off, I want to thank everyone for being here. And I'm going to tell you a quick anecdotal story of why this panel is here. So back in February, I had the pleasure of traveling to the country that I was born, which was Manila, Philippines. And while there, I decided to take a little jaunt over to Korea. We have a modular manufacturing partner in Korea that we're hoping to help aid in deployment to the United States. And boy, I came back feeling like, wow. What is in the water in that neck of the woods that they're building with such industrial confidence, the capacity to build buildings at scale. And I honestly came back to Austin, which has always been a very vibrant building community, feeling a little bit siloed and isolated and kind of like, okay, why is it so hard here to get things done? So we put this panel together. Chris said, hey, you should do a panel and try to get through all this. So I'm going to go around the horn here and just, Daniel McCrum, he's visiting us from University of Dublin, and he is a co-founder of the MMC group in University of Dublin. And there's, let's say, a rising tide of industrialized housing in Dublin, which I think is really fascinating. And I'm going to ask him to kind of share some of his experiences there. We got Menno Hilberts, who now resides in Seattle, but he has a long career in international development and was the lead modular executive for Citizen M Hotels for 10 years? 15 years, okay. I didn't want to unduly date you, Menno. And is still very much entrenched in the hospitality space. Cooper Lane is the director of True Volumetric, and he hails from Windsor, Ontario, which happens to be the only city in Canada that is south of the United States. So you think about why that's the case. But frankly, directly across from Detroit, his family's been in automotive and automation for a long time, and now he's using that experience and that in the modular space. So we had a workshop. I went around and kind of met with everybody individually and kind of shared my experience in Asia. And we had a workshop just about 6 weeks ago. About a minute into the workshop, Menno goes, what do we mean by industrialized construction? And I was thinking, oh boy, this is gonna take a lot longer than I thought. So definitions are important. Terminologies are important. Daniel spoke up and said something along the lines of, well, what we're doing in the MMC space is there's a certain categorization of what we consider we kind of lump together in terms of industrialized construction. And I think I'd like to ask Daniel first to kind of share his thoughts on that. It's a term that we're not really familiar with here in the US in general, but it is very relevant in the UK and Please share.
Yeah, sure. Slight correction, University of Dublin that's our competition, actually. So I'm University College Dublin, so it's slight correction. Slight correction.
I told you guys to introduce yourselves because I knew I was going to get it wrong.
Yeah, so I suppose in Ireland and the UK, we use the terminology modern methods of construction. I think generally it's a very bad using the word modern. I mean, because some of the methods aren't particularly modern. I think industrialized construction brings in around digitalization, automation, much more. But in terms of modern methods of construction, it's a very strict framework. It relates to housing. There's 7 different categories. So the first category is 3D volumetric. Second category is 2D panelized construction. The third then is non-systemized. And then additive manufacturing is category 4. And then, think of things like 3D concrete printing. And then bathroom pods are category 5, etc. And then 6 and 7 are on-site efficiencies. So it very much focuses in on that. But I think in Europe, the term industrialized construction is far more widely used. And I think it captures I think Chris probably really kind of in the introduction kind of highlighted exactly what it means. And I think it's probably overall a better terminology. But the ship has sailed for us. We're stuck with it and we're going with it. But it creates a common language and a very strict definition, whereas we had our conversation and said, what do we mean by industrialized construction? 3 people who are supposed to know a bit about it, So
Yeah, and there's a common theme of the need for standardization, and I think we should start there, right? With just the language that we use and the way we communicate about the work that we do. And Menno, I think you probably had some other thoughts in that regard on IC versus, say, volumetric modular, and kind of where we need to direct our focus.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've spent my career in full volumetric and really have no ambition to go back in hybrids or whatever. But it's interesting that in Ireland you've come up with a real definition, because in most settings we find ourselves as people that advocate for this space. We have a level of confusion and we don't know really what we're talking about. And I wonder if Chris and yourself are closer to nailing those definitions down. It would certainly help us. It's not what we're going to talk about today, but it'd be good to get the definitions right, and nomenclature does matter.
Coop, you have anything to add?
I mean, you just touched on it at the end of your explanation there, but I agree. I mean, we should probably work on standardizing the nomenclature before we talk about what we're doing, standardizing structures and stuff like that when we do it true. But yeah, I agree. Great.
Good segue. So when we first had our conversation, Coop, I kind of regaled you with my trip. And I shared what I thought was like going to be the thesis of this panel, which was, back in the post-World War II, the U.S. was at the pinnacle of manufacturing. We had manufacturing supremacy. But over the several generations since, we've been offshoring our achievements, our IP, if you were, to countries that probably at the time we used terms like developing countries or third world countries. And the reasons are varied, but here we are in Texas, which is the 8th largest economy in the world, and 35 foreign trade zones. And Samsung is about to invest something like $17 to $20 billion into this little town called Taylor, Texas, which I think last I checked, population was like 20,000 people. And I shared this thought. Maybe I just had a really good vacation. But my fear was, I think I used the term, are we experiencing the first phase of almost like a technological reverse colonization? All these countries that took our IP, improved on it, and came back and is now reinvesting it into the United States. Or am I overreacting? And you kind of said that I wasn't. In fact, you attached a term to it. Reshoring.
Yeah, reshoring is real. It's happening in more advanced manufacturing spaces. So to expand a little bit on my background, I come from automotive, aerospace. I've worked in automation. And just recently, I've been in the offsite construction space for roughly 9 years. And that was more to I was selling automation. So I worked for automation firms that was selling automation into production systems for modular manufacturers. I always had responsibility still in automotive and aerospace. We are seeing that type of work reshoring. I think the reality is that in modular manufacturing, can we call it reshoring? I don't know if it's actually shored here yet. So what we are seeing is that there is foreign investment. There's a lot of interest. Like you had mentioned, what you had mentioned, you're talking about semiconductors and microchips. Mm-hmm. As far as modular manufacturing goes, I think that most of the people in this room know about the potential investors that we've heard of over the last few years, like Admaris being one of them, being a gigafactory that was planned to go into Georgia. As far as I know, and I don't know if anyone in this room knows anything further on this, but they've decided to go to Australia. And they were being offered 9-digit incentives, 2 million square feet facility. And I believe, you'd have to think that with those kinds of incentives to make a change to go back or to go to a country like Australia is maybe the demand is there. Maybe the problem is that the demand, they could not justify the capital because the demand isn't currently present. Now, the conversation that we just heard, maybe it's coming. The reality is that if there is going to be foreign investment to build factories, gigafactories that can handle, all out of one factory in one foul swoop, few thousand, say, what we're talking here is we're talking about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 modules per year. The reality is that to get a factory like that built and running, you're looking at, I come again from automation and machinery. A year is very aggressive. 2 years is probably realistic.
Yeah.
And that's if you have the capital in place and the commitments to
it's a long road. So I think what we're looking at, and actually it's been touched on several times so far with the first two speakers, is that we have to address it with the capacity that we have currently in North America.
Yeah. What's ironic is for most common folk, the biggest need is housing, right? And so there's a natural tendency to assume that can be satisfied through volumetric modular methods, in contrast to conventional design, bid, build, which itself is, they're having their challenges as well. Yeah. So I think I would say that probably volumetric modular at least de-risks the whole scenario, but the numbers still need to work. It sounds like if we are going to invest on the supply side, what should we be investing it towards? And this is where I think, Menno, your ideas about the fragmented demand and how we kind of create demand aggregators or demand buffers so that all that effort can be directed appropriately to the proper markets and potentially maybe incubate these factories for future housing supply? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did about a dozen modular projects for Citizen and worked with a dozen manufacturing facilities, not because I wanted to switch gears every time, but because they kept going out of business. And they all struggle, and there's a lot of manufacturers in the room here, and they'll probably nod. They all struggle from the same two symptoms, is that you lack a clear demand signal, right? You don't have certainty of demand, and you don't have certainty of the product because there's no standardization, right? So it's basically standing up a car manufacturing facility, but you don't know which car you're building, and you don't know when you're building them. So it's that they're also always chasing their tail. I think the obviously what the military just told us like an hour ago, that is a potential game changer, right? If there's a clear demand signal out there, you could structure the supply side. I would say to this room, there's also an opportunity for us as industry to, rather than fight each other, unite and start standardizing this product. Because if I look at it from I'm a hotel developer, if you look at the Hampton Inns and the Courtyards and whatever, they're all sort of the same box. They're not that different. Same in residential. I'm not a residential developer, but those studios and 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, they're not that different. Just get all of us to combine and say, let's just develop 10, 20 standardized product solutions, which, again, maybe as an analog to what Milcom was saying, is different on detail level. So you can have different fixtures or whatever, but have a large common denominator of standard products, standard solutions, which we can do. We can unite.
Sure.
And that will really unlock.
Well, I mean, a good example, the
industry.
car industry, right? I mean, cars are typologically identical, right? 4 wheels, steering wheel, has its own air conditioning, and
Yeah.
it's a hermetically sealed, structure that prevents the environment from, affecting you. So in theory, it's doable, and I think you actually used Magna as an example of how you can kind of standardize it.
Well, I could use Magna. I can use, talk about nomenclature. I could use chassis as an example. We use chassis in the modular space, but Magna is a supplier, a tier 1 supplier to the OEMs in automotive. They have several plants around North America globally, and a lot of them make the same product. A lot of them make that same chassis. Some of them go to different OEMs. That's the idea that we have. You just brought up there. This is the start of our product manual for the standardized structural system that we've developed, and that's the whole idea. And it goes to what Menno was talking about, is that if you have the demand signal, if you have the projects of the magnitude that we're talking about, we can mobilize not only the modular space, but we can start to tap into other advanced manufacturing spaces. Right. So fab houses that are doing work for aerospace and automotive can start to make a standard product like what you see on the screen there. Mm-hmm. If you mobilize 4 or 5 of those facilities and you team them up with 5 or 6 modular manufacturers,
right. So
then you're starting to actually, yes, exactly. Yeah, you're creating, and this conversation was live about a year and a half ago when tariffs were announced. The supply chain that we've developed in automotive, again, specifically to focus in on one industry, that egg is scrambled. It is so widespread, complex, and intertwined. You can't unscramble that egg. This is one of the biggest challenges of reshoring. But the point is, to that, if you look at those kinds of supply chain models, we can then, if we're pooling the capabilities and the capacities of the people in this room, and we're tapping into other advanced manufacturing spaces, there's no way that we can't address the kinds of volumes that, of projects like the magnitude that we just heard. We can then also start to look at different use cases like data centers and correctional facilities. These are all things that are being built, some of them a little bit prefab and offsite, but we can start to utilize more offsite.
Yeah.
Because the potential's there.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at multifamily, I think that's 400,000 units a year, and that's because it could be double that if developers can make projects pencil. But if like 10% would be volumetric, that's huge. That could be an undercurrent for the industry to change what we're doing completely.
Just real quick, I'm going to get to you in a minute because, just I want to do a quick poll. How many people in this room are on NDA? Are on an NDA? Okay. How many of you are on more than one NDA? Okay. I bet, the question is what's NDA-able, right? Yeah. Because, it's likely most of you are working in the steel frame processes and that kind of thing. And what I've learned in the volumetric modular is oftentimes the IP or the proprietary content is at the connections. Everything else that's in between, it's off-the-shelf cold form steel or so on and so forth. Anyway, I want to get to Daniel here because I think where we're still struggling, they've managed to succeed in Ireland to some extent. I think the term we landed on was colluding. Collusion.
No, we agreed not to use that phrase.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Collaboration. Was it not collaboration?
Cooperating?
Cooperating,
Collaborating? Conflating? It's a C word. Anyway, Daniel, I love this. Please share your story on when you got everyone in a room and enjoyed the silence that we're kind of hearing here.
Yeah, maybe needs a bit of explanation, that introduction maybe a little bit. So the background to this is the Department of Housing came to us and said, look, we'd like to put together a research project where we're going to create open source construction details for one particular type of MMC. So we held a meeting, we put a proposal together to get funding from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment in Ireland. So we put a proposal together, but before we submitted the proposal, we got the manufacturers from all the typical industrialized construction, off-site construction, modular and panelized, who are working in Ireland. And I presented and said, so we're going to test all your details, just like you guys have done, through European standard testing to demonstrate compliance with the Irish building regulations, and we're going to make them open access. And there was just complete silence in the room. So a couple of them, in fairness to them, straight away were on it and said, this is fantastic. This is what we need, okay? A couple of them were like, you could see the cogs turning in their head. I think they'll turn and figure this one out. And then a couple of them were like, yeah, good luck. We're not having anything to do with this. This is our IP. So the project has progressed and project has started, and we've done, the project is looking at 2D panelized light gauge steel for residential construction. And in Ireland, one way, if you've an innovative building system and you want to get compliance with the building regulations, you go through this process called aggregate certification. And then what it does is it demonstrates for your building system that it meets the Irish building regulations. I know there's a few companies in here who are actually going through it or have gone through it. And the problem is everybody is repeating the same tests. They're very, very expensive. It takes a long time. And what we did was then we held a workshop with 3 of these companies who had this certification. And it turns out, for 2-story, for duplexes and apartments under 5 stories, I'd say they had 2 details that were different. So if you think about all the build-ups that are in your building, your party walls, twin party walls, your external walls, they were all the exact same. And it was a great experience for them. It was really liberating for them. And what they realized was, well, what is our IP? If we've all done this and we've all ended up, it's all basic physics, ultimately. You're using as you've said, we're using the same materials. There's the same proprietary systems on the market. How could we not end up with the same solution?
Right.
And this collaboration, collusion, whatever the term is, I think what the industry has really seen is actually that's what we need to be doing.
It's a way to get around discrepancies in regulation as well, where just give them a product that's consistent, right? And it's easier to get it through.
So the industry is setting the standard, and the industry is now developing their own, building code for that type of construction. And since then, the modular in terms of mass timber and steel, they're on board as well. They want to get going as well. They want to do this as well. The benefits are significant. And the innovation, what they've seen is they're not giving away IP, is we're agreeing a baseline and we can innovate around that baseline.
So who would be best placed here in this country to do that? Who would?
So what we're doing is it's called Construct Innovate, and they're Ireland's National Research Centre for Construction Technology and Innovation, and they're seen as independent. I mean, like, I'm an academic. I'm not making any money out of this. I'm completely independent. And that independent perspective, I don't know, maybe Chris could do it over here, but you need someone independent who doesn't have skin in the game, and they're going to manage that system. Well, and it's open and transparent, and all of the stakeholders are involved, and they're the ones making decisions,
So it's clear that there's an advantage.
Massive advantage. They all see the advantage. Like, if you're a supplier and you're selling these products, you just think, I'm going to sell more product because we're going to make more of this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's ultimately,
Sure.
That's the bottom line,
Yeah. And, I'm sure there's still nuances, right? I mean, you can tailor it depending on where you are. And
Well, I think like modular is different, as you mentioned. The connections, the intermodular connections are where the IP is, and I still question you on that, whether there really is that much IP in those. Like, I mean, how different could they be? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But sure.
I've worked with a dozen. They all claim they're different and they have their own IP. If I look at it as somewhat of a layman, they all look fairly the same. So,
I will say that as a designer, because we're so code facing and climate facing and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think the challenge is taking this universal concept and having it work in a country like the US where there's, what, 7 or 8 climate zones and multiple subzones. We have seismic on the West Coast. We've got high velocity in Florida and along the eastern seaboard. So I think the challenge would be, how do we get this consistent, collaborative IP work in all these different conditions? And I would also argue that, yes, I complain all the time about regulations being varied, but there's a reason why regulations are varied. It's because of these geographic conditions, different economic conditions, those kind of things. But to me, that's a problem that can be overcome with good design. And another point that I can say is that I can't copyright a 1-bedroom, 1-bath design. It is an open source design. I can't claim that take that and it's like, all right, Rommel just solved the whole issue of 1-bedroom, 1 design. It's like, it's open source, right? So anyway.
Well, maybe just a quick point on the slide that you have up there on the right-hand side. It's the standardized design approach study. So the Department of Housing in Ireland brought in the modular and panelized, 2D panelized, and said, look, let's optimize our typical housing that we use in social and affordable housing. So the state has committed to 25% of all state-built housing will be done through industrialized construction. So they're trying to create a pipeline as best they can, but they've kind of got the industry in and said, let's just use a standard set of, it's a bit like the playbook in the UK, but they've done it specifically for, 7 or 8 different typologies, and said that manual is now openly and freely available, trying to create a bit more of a level playing field for the modular in particular to compete,
That's interesting, because you're saying there's a 25% signal that they want to.
It's a commitment by the government of Ireland. It is a commitment that they will 25% of all social and affordable housing will be.
So it started with the government. It was a government initiative. To start.
All of these, to be brutally frank, have been government initiatives.
Yeah.
And is that through subsidies, or how are they getting to that quotum of 25%? Because it's easy to say that, but then how are you going to incentivize the industry to actually do it?
To be totally honest with you, in terms of 2D panelized, we're probably doing it already. So yeah, I would say it sounds more impressive, but they are investing in factories as well. There is a strategic investment fund to help new factories or expansion of existing factories. So they've really bought in, I would say. Like I always think this comes back to productivity. The construction sector is terrible at productivity. Yeah. And we just want to be able to, in a position in a housing crisis, to be able to build twice the amount of houses a year rather than one,
There's some similar, my limited sample size, similar standardization initiatives in Korea. All the frames at the facility that I visited, they were all painted in tumescent paint. And I said, whoa, wow, that's really great. That's not necessarily mandatory here in the US, but they said, well, it's mandatory here. So we figured out a way to make it as efficient as we can. Let's say that we've shored up the supply side. Let's say we've got all the proper frameworks in place. It sounds to me that the potential is having a large enough rollout, right? That justifies. It makes the what's the term? The juice being worth the squeeze. Yeah. Right. I think you had some experiences in China, Menno, that I'd like you to share, and I actually have some slides here as well, which is a significant rollout.
Yeah, so this is actually in Hong Kong, not in China. Yeah. It's affordable housing that the local government initiated. It's not really subsidized. It's actually technically temporary. It's a 5-year project, but the sheer magnitude of it is incredible. It's 10,000 units. living units and they built those at about $135 a square foot. So the sheer scale is anything beyond I've seen in the US, but not dissimilar from what Milcon is proposing, right? So you can see what costs can come in at if you deliver scale. But this is centrally managed through a couple of factories that produce 1,000 units a month, right? So that's probably the combined steel production capacity of the US combined. So if you do have reliable demand signals and trustworthy owners, so to say, because the private sector is not doing this currently, right? There's tons of developers, but they're all looking at it through the lens of their individual project. And that's never going to spark enough energy for the manufacturing industry to unite and drive this kind of supply.
The Korean manufacturer we're talking to, they're producing 30 boxes a day. And that's with little automation. Yep. And that's using nothing more than AutoCAD. They're not even, I mean, Revit apparently isn't even that prevalent in Korea. So it's like, well, you know, you've got some frameworks in place, and then I think you also have a building culture that allows for you to do this at scale, which I think we're still trying to grapple with finding here in the U.S.
But this is actually interesting. They started off doing pretty low tech, as you described, but because of the consistent demand out there, they're building new factories, which are highly automated.
Right.
So you see innovation is possible and cost reduction is possible if you keep the demand there and are a reliable owner, which is, I guess, what the government has done in Ireland.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay. We should take questions.
I'd like to, open up the forum here for questions. Does anyone have any questions?
We probably have time for about 2 questions. You come here first.
So as the real estate person in the room, how does the investor and lender capital work when you do a collaboration across the table?
How you do a collaboration across?
If you merge companies with skill set and so forth, we are a capitalist country. So how does that work? I'm just trying to get clear in my mind. If you remove competition, you do collaboration. How does that work exactly?
I mean, from my experience, from what I've seen so far, like these projects have not happened yet. My assumption, and not say assumption, but from what I can see, how this is going to unfold is that there's going to be one large GC that holds the paper, and then they outsource it like you typically see in any other manufacturing kind of supply chain.
And just to clarify, these projects are bid out, right? Even though they're 10,000 units, they're still bid out. And people are really sour if they lose that contract.
Fantastic. Any other questions from the room? Yes.
There's an example of a countrywide approval process with NSAI in Ireland. And I wanted to hear from your perspective if that's been a positive impact for the MMC companies.
So there's been lots of issues around that because it was never intended, but it has ultimately become the gatekeeper. So if you imagine people who are approving these buildings, at building control, for example, and they may not have the knowledge of these systems, they revert to saying, where's your NSAI agreement cert that demonstrates it? So it's been a huge frustration for the industry because it takes a long time to get them, and you have to go and pay for the testing. So it has probably ended up being a roadblock, actually, in terms of more wider adoption of, and hence the project that I mentioned, where we're kind of trying to bypass that and say, come on, let's let's try and set up standard set of details and set up maybe a building code around this to bypass all of that. So if that's openly available, you don't need to go through that process unless your system is different from that building code, for example. Yeah, so I would say it has been a blocker. Yeah, definitely a negative experience. Yeah.
Any other questions? Rommel, do you want to give some closing remarks?
Collude.
Collude. Well, I think one thing that we kind of, our conclusion was not the conclusion that I thought we were going to have. It's not as though the grass is greener on the other side. Where all these countries are dealing with some of the same fragmentation issues that we're dealing with. However, some of them have frameworks that allow it to sort of succeed. And I, personally, I don't want to be a cheap dime store cultural anthropologist, but in Asia, I learned that 85% of, in Korea, for example, or actually Asia in general, 85% of companies are family owned, which I think is a different kind of framework, right, to work within. When you have multi-generational sort of interest, and that's focused on the community, there's a difference there, and against the culture in the U.S. as you already mentioned, competition. It's all about entrepreneurism, that kind of thing. So, what's the equivalent on our side? And I think the challenge of this conference is for all you all to think about what you would do to sort of help facilitate this collusion.
Collaboration.
Thank you.
Thanks.